Good to see you guys. Hope you guys are doing well, having a good summer. Feels like it's over because it's August, but there's more. There's more. Hang in there. Suck the sap out of August to get your summer. So, my wife Shannon and I used to travel a lot, still do a decent amount, but we lived in the D.C. area for a long time, so that meant we had to travel all the way to Toledo to see my family, all the way to Kentucky to see her. So, holidays are a big triangle of traveling. Pre-kids, mostly just hours and hours of time in a car together. And first, just to let you know, Shannon almost always drives. That's how we get down. And that lets me do all the things that I love to do. You know, I get to either nap or read a book or write lyrics or whatever, you know, do all kinds of stuff. And I should throw in, we talk sometimes. You know, we have a healthy marriage. So we talk sometimes and all that. But how many of you ever played any travel or driving games as you travel? Anybody ever done that? Okay. So, yeah, like Slug Bug. You know, if you hate the people with you, you play Slug Bug, which is you see a VW Beetle, and you're like, Slug Bug, and you punch the person next to you, which is just great for escalating love between friends in a friendship. And so then there's also Padiddle. Have you ever played Padiddle? Okay, yeah, Padiddle is you are driving. It's especially good at night when you're getting tired, but you're driving, and anytime you see a vehicle with a headlight out, you punch the vehicle's ceiling. And so depending on whether it's your vehicle or not, depends on how hard you punch the ceiling. But we had some vehicles that you just see dents all over in the padding and the roof above us. Yeah, we played Padiddle a lot. And then there's the variation that we incorporated into the game, which is if you see a tail light out, what do you say? What is it? Lit it up? I've never heard that one. Okay. There's several things. That's what I was introducing, so that was a perfect example. But yeah, we padaddle, peduncle, and then whatever thing she said in Greek. Yeah, just like if you see a tail light, and you get points every time. Like I'm up to 12. You're falling way behind here, Smith, and that kind of thing. So, you know, you play some games. A lot of it's just like Harry and Lloyd from Dumb and Dumber. You're like, Quincy's, they're playing tag in the front, you know, like, Anna Quincy's, no startsies, you know, all on and on and on. Triple stamp, touch blue, make it true. You can't triple stamp a double stamp. You can't triple stamp a double stamp, Lloyd. You know what I'm talking about. Okay, moving along. So one of the things we did is we played Padiddle a lot, but also we eventually started coming to these quizzes that we would do, and we would like nerd out and quiz each other on state capitals. Also, a fun one was I would throw out the nickname of a city, like Mistake on the Lake or something, and you know she'd have to name the city or vice versa, Big Apple. So there's all kinds of city nicknames, and I love knowing the city nicknames. They're fun to know. And then, you know, one of the big things was I taught early in our marriage, Shannon, about NFL football. And eventually, NFL football, for those of you who are longtime fans, they realigned the divisions. And so Shannon would say, because she was new to football, like, quiz me on the realignment. Oh, this is so sexy. I might pull over right now. We might have to make out because she was asking me, quiz her on the realignment of the NFL division. Okay, who's in the NFC South? NFC South is, you know, so quiz her, and she would be like, okay, I got him down. And so we'd had lots of fun, you know, kind of making up quizzes. One of the things that eventually evolved, though, is that we would start quizzing each other on things that just came up organically. Like, okay, Shannon, if you ever had a weekend to go to any city and you could take 5 of your girlfriends with you, what city would it be and who are your 5? And she'd be like, ooh, that's fun. And so this is before we started Momentum, mostly when we did this. And so she would start thinking, oh, gosh, okay, this person. Okay, I think, okay, come on, who are you 5? And she'd come up with her 5. Okay, Dan, if you could go to the Super Bowl and take 5 guys, burgers and fries, with you, and who would you take? And I'd be like, ooh, okay. So we don't know who's going to be in the Super Bowl, so they have to be people who love football, no matter who's playing. Okay, so let me think about and we do this together. You know, if you could have dinner with, if we could have dinner with 5 of our single friends, who would we pick? Ooh, dinner out with some of our single friends. Let's pick, all right, you know, so we'd come up with that. Then one of the ones that was the most difficult by far was we would say, what if the 2 of us together could pick 12 of our friends? No kids are coming, so you don't have to count their kids. Kids are out, sorry. But we pick 12 friends to come with us to the Bahamas. Who would we take who are your 12 go? And we'd each get to pick separately our 12. Okay, if I got to pick the 12 that would go with us to the Bahamas, here's who I would pick. Start going through like, oh, and again, this is pre-momentum, so the list would be different. You know, with any season, I mean, the Petersons, they've been on it for a long time. They live with us there, live with us here. So, not with us, but near us. Anyways, you go through and you like pick. And so you got to start thinking about a lot of stuff when it comes to who are your 12 for that. Okay? Because first off, you got group dynamics, right? You got like, okay, I love all these people, but there are two people that bring drama about each other. They just got this way they start competing. They don't like one another. Somehow they're in my group of friends, but they don't interact well, so I can't bring both of them. One of them's got to, so you got to think through that, you know. That's a big deal to kind of think through how that might be. Sometimes you know, and don't act like you don't. You got a friend who's kind of needy when you're around some of your other friends. You know what I'm talking about. Like as soon as they're with you and your friends, and they're not the only friend with you, they're like, suddenly, hey, look, I was wondering if we could hang out, do this. Somebody, oh gosh, here we go. They're getting jealous because I have other friends. And so you got to think about that dynamic. Oh, he's not coming. He's way too needy, okay? And so you start thinking through that. A big one is, who are your super picky eater friends? That's huge for me because I try to work out a lot, and I've got a pretty good metabolism, but there is a fat man trapped in this body. Food is so important to me, and if you got a really picky friend, it's already hard enough with a total of 14 people to pick a restaurant to go to. You add a super picky person to the mix, and I'm like, oh, you can stay and get a jar of peanut butter and grape jelly, and you can make something back at your hotel because we are not waiting for you to pick a restaurant. In fact, I'm not even bringing that person. They're so picky. So you got to think through that. And then a big one was what we called the package deal issue. Package deal. That means, man, I love him so much, but he didn't marry well. I want to bring him, but I so don't want to bring her. I love her. She's a sweetheart. That dude is the biggest airhead, though, and they're a package deal. Before you go to the Bahamas, are you having a conversation with one of your friends? Like, hey, we're going, but she ain't, okay? Like, so is he one of the 12 and you're having that conversation, or are you lumping her in? Like, oh, man, this is the worst. So it would constantly be this fun discussion we'd have that would honestly get us to really express how much we love those people that were at the tops of the list. Like, oh, man, we love them so much. Like, they're so great. We love both of them if they're a couple, and that's tough to come across sometimes. But who are your 12? And so turn to Mark chapter 3. This first section is a summary statement from Mark, the author, who wrote the Gospel of Mark, that kind of eases us into our main event passage. And so let me just read this, and I'll tell you a couple things out of it. Mark 3, verse 7. Jesus, after 5 conflict stories with religious authorities, withdrew with his disciples to the lake, and a large crowd from Galilee followed. So he's at the Sea of Galilee, what they call the lake. When they heard about all he was doing, many people came to him from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, and the regions across the Jordan River and around Tyre and Sidon. Because of the crowd, he told his disciples to have a small boat ready for him to keep the people from crowding him. For he had healed many, so that those with diseases were pushing forward to touch him. Whenever the impure spirits or unclean spirits or demons saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God." But he gave them strict orders not to tell others about him. So just some quick notes and summary of this summary section that Mark has just kind of given us a summary. This is how things are going in Jesus' ministry right now. Then he gets to the next thing, which is kind of a milestone. This is probably the height of Jesus' popularity. Like, period. I mean, Jesus, if you just peek at this map with me for a second, the places that are named in this summary section, first off, this is Sea of Galilee up on the map here. I know it's hard to see, but you just have to generally see what I'm pointing at. Sea of Galilee, Jesus is up in this area. 90% of his ministry happens up here, around here. But it mentions people are coming from all over. So they're coming from Jerusalem and Idumea. Well, Jerusalem, way down here. It's not on the map, but Idumea is down here. That's the Greek name for a place called Edom, which are historical enemies of Israel. And so basically people very far from the south are coming all the way up here to hear and see Jesus or be healed by him. And then it says people from across the Jordan. Well, the Jordan is a river. And across the Jordan are places like Decapolis, which was a series of 10 cities. And then also a place called Perea. Those are both east of the Jordan River. So they're coming from the east. And then it also throws in from Tyre and Sidon. Okay, that is super far to the northwest. In fact, this is modern-day Libya. This isn't even in Palestine. Tyre and Sidon. Syrophoenician people live up there along the Mediterranean coast. So really kind of what Mark's trying to say here is Jesus is at the height of his popularity. His teaching is spreading from small rural towns to these places. And another thing that I think Mark is trying to communicate is that Jesus is for all people. Again, the places down south, especially Idumea, that is not a Jewish area. Across the river, across the Jordan, those are not largely Jewish populations. And when you get up to Tyre and Sidon, definitely not Jewish people. They're all different mixes of people. So one other small thing is notice that the demons, when they see Jesus, and this pops up, Mark mentions it a lot, things like this. The demons call Jesus the Son of God. Who is the real Jesus? He's not just a prophet. He is the Son of God, which is like the ultimate title for the real Jesus of Nazareth. He is made of the same stuff as God. He is divine. And so the real Jesus is the Son of God. So at this point, Jesus has this large entourage of followers. Huge crowds are coming to see him. So what does Jesus do? He gets small. Next passage says this, verse 13. Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12 that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach and have authority to drive out demons. These are the 12 he appointed. So notice in this list, Jesus actually nicknames the first 3 people. So it says Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, which means rock. James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. To them he gave the name Boanerges, which means sons of thunder. We don't quite know what that means, but there's some good strong guesses that have to do with a Samaritan city that rejected Jesus and his disciples. And James and John were like, give us the word, Jesus. We'll call down thunder, lightning on him. We'll call down fire from heaven. And we kind of put together, maybe that's where it came from. Like, whoa, slow down, fellas, you know. And so that was their nickname, Sons of Thunder. Then, verse 18, Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, Frank, who did something so bad Jesus couldn't even repeat it, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him, which, notice, it's probably deliberately he's listed last because, as Mark mentions, he's the one who will eventually betray Jesus. So, introducing, in a pretty monumental passage, the dirty dozen. Here they are. Like, these are the 12 that Jesus says, okay, a lot of people are coming to me, but you will be my main disciples. And another name for these 12 are the apostles, which means sent ones. Okay, so discipleship is a major theme through Mark's gospel. It comes up a lot. He really emphasizes it, especially discipleship in the sense of, if I'm going to be a disciple, I'm going to sacrifice things that I want for Jesus. I'm going to serve and give of myself in a way that is like Christ. But discipleship in itself, it really means like to spiritually apprentice someone as a verb. Like if I'm discipling someone, it means I'm spiritually apprenticing them. And so a disciple is someone who learns by doing. And the best modern day word for that would bring to picture what it would have then as a disciple today would be apprentice. Like I learn by doing. There is instruction, there's teaching involved, but I'm not just sitting there like a student listening to a professor and just breathing in knowledge. I'm actually doing. It's hands-on learning. And so Jesus chose 12 main disciples, 12 apostles, and the number 12 is significant because the ancient nation of Israel had 12 tribes. And so this is kind of Jesus' way of saying, I'm creating a new nation. I'm creating a new community. In fact, later Simon Peter, one of the 12, would call the church a holy nation. And so this is a new community, a restored version of Israel. And so the number 12 is symbolic for a reason. Israel had 12 tribes. Jesus had 12 disciples. Now, have any of you ever, by round of applause, ever pulled an all-nighter for anything? Study, finish a project? Okay. Silence was by the people who didn't procrastinate. Okay, that was, if you've ever pulled an all-nighter. Well, I think this is kind of interesting that Luke chapter 6, which records the same story, but different writers include some details left out by others, kind of like ABC versus, NBC versus Fox, like different details in the same reported story. And so in Luke 6, it actually mentions that Jesus pulls an all-nighter praying before picking the 12. He stays up all night in prayer, and then the next morning gets up and is like, all right, here's my 12. And the way that I picture this happening, and this is just my imagination, is I picture him going into that evening, and people, they're following him like crazy. He has to escape to a mountainside to go pray and get away from people, and they're camping out, sleeping, and he's like, Father, just bring to mind the picture, the faces. There's so many people here. So many people to choose from. So many people are following me. But 12 that I can really invest in. Bring to mind the faces of those people. And through the night, the Father reveals to him, here are the 12. And in the morning, after being up all night praying about it, he's like, all right, here's who I want. And he walks around kind of like in that video, and he puts a hand on, it's going to be you, Simon, who I'll call Peter. It's going to be you, James, John, sons of thunder. And he goes through, these are my 12. These are the 12 that I choose. And so it says in verse 14, he appointed 12 that they might be with him. Very simple, but it's just making clear the point is they're going to spend time with Jesus in spiritual apprenticeship. We're going to learn from Jesus, but not just teaching, doing. They're going to eat with him, and he's going to include them in his life. Like he's 12ing with them. He's choosing to live in community with others, and so they eat with him. They travel with him. They see him handle conflict. Those last 5 stories in the Gospel of Mark. They ask him questions, and so they have full access almost completely to Jesus's life. A few times I had the privilege, maybe a handful of times, of hanging out with a guy. His name is Bob Buford, Christian leader, author, philanthropist. He also was, back in the day, one of the pioneers of the cable television industry. So he was one of the originators of the idea of, like, people only have 3 channels locally, and they got to get up and turn the channel manually and all that kind of stuff. What if, we did this thing and created cable television back in the day for my old people? And so as a result, he became a multimillionaire, made tons of money. In fact, by the time he was 30, he's like, I've accomplished all of my goals, business-wise and financially and all that. He's like, I kind of don't know what to do from here. Like, that happened so quickly. And so basically, he wrote a book called Halftime, mid-90s he wrote it, and it was written specifically for people at midlife. And his advice for them in this book was how to move from success to significance. Like, okay, maybe you've made it in your career. You might not be filthy rich, but you've like, this is what I wanted. I've got a home, I've got a spouse and 2.2 kids, and I've got all this stuff going on. But I want my life to matter and have significance in my life, so I've accomplished, and in a lot of times, and people he knew, it would be people who were very wealthy. He'd be like, okay, so now what? How are you going to be significant? How are you going to use your life for significance in this world? So he would basically teach people. He would find people who were also blessed financially, and he would say, I want to teach you how to take $1 and leverage it into $100, which you already know something about that. I want to teach you to take $1, leverage it to $100, and use that to be just filthy generous for God's kingdom. Like crazy generous. And be like, man, I've been blessed. How can I give back to God based on the way I've been blessed? And be outrageously generous. And so He'd teach them to invest their time, treasure, talents. So what Bob did was he had a wallet card. And he would put 8 to 10 names on that wallet card, which was just a card that he laminated every time he recreated it and put in his wallet. And on that had the names of 8 to 10 people. And he would mentor them, disciple them for a season, usually 6 to 8 months. And he'd invest in them, and he would give to them, and he would do everything he could to set them up to be the best at what they felt called to be. And he would help them be generous to God's kingdom. Learn to make more money so they could give more money and that kind of stuff. Learn to expand their nonprofit. Learn to just kill it in their business as a leadership. And after 6 to 8 months, they were off the card. They were taken off the wallet card, and he'd put new names. And there were always like 8 to 10 people on that wallet card. A friend of mine, who was actually a mentor of mine named Todd Wilson, once was someone on that card. And eventually, after being someone on that card, he asked my friend Todd Wilson to be his guy that he chose that would actually travel the country and pick for Bob who would be on the wallet card. So imagine the kinds of people he's hanging out with, traveling the country. Bob would be like, there's this billionaire in Seattle who's a follower of Jesus. He started this nonprofit, but he's destroying it in this business. And he is interested in me mentoring him, but I want you to kind of go vet him. And Todd would eventually know Bob so well that he'd go vet him. And one time, Shannon and I were home, and we were watching a Cavs game, and Todd texted us. It was a Wednesday night. And he was like, hey, I'm in Portland. I'm at a Trailblazers game, and I'm here with one of those guys that I'm vetting for Bob Buford. He goes, I just wanted you to know I'm sitting right behind the Cavs at this game and wanted to know if you wanted me to invite LeBron to Momentum. And I was like, shut up. He is not. I will slap him upside the head if he is sitting behind LeBron. The next morning, Sports Center, there's my buddy Todd right behind the bench. Like, are you kidding me right now? And he's sitting next to some guy who, is unnamed, who's a billionaire next to him, who he's trying to decide, is he serious enough about wanting to be generous and give to God's kingdom in a way that's outrageous that Bob would take him on as a mentor, put him on the card? Crazy stuff like that. So I met Bob, like I said, a handful of times, spent some time with him here and there, always as seriously like a peon, like, let me be a fly on the wall during this dinner. Can I please be in the room with Bob and these leaders, that kind of thing. And like somebody's like, come on, you make some jokes, it'll be fun, come on. So I'm like, all right, I'm a dumb guy, I get to make some jokes, And so I'd go and be in the room and just get to hear these amazing leaders talk. But one of the things that Bob's always said is he was like, man, when he was getting really older, I got about 15 more years to do this. Like I'm trying to make sure that my life has significance. Not just that I'm remembered for, man, that dude got filthy rich. Came across an idea that, he's like, I want my life to matter for the kingdom of God, and I've got about 15 years to do it. Well, it turned out he had about 10 years to do it. He passed away in 2018. And he just spent so much of his last years with these axiomatic kind of like, I hear him say these things anytime I'm around him. Things like, my fruit, the fruit of my life grows on other people's trees. Like, I want to pour into, invest in some people for a season, and then they rotate out and a new person comes in. I want to invest, and when I see them have a win, I don't think it's my win. I just know I got to have a part of that. I know I got to be a part of investing in them, making them the best at what they could be so that they could sacrifice for God's kingdom and be a disciple of Jesus. And so it's super cool just helping people win financially, in philanthropy, and spiritually, most important. And I've always thought about this. How cool is it that, by the way, Bob was mentored by a guy, if any of you are business nerds, read business books or whatever, Bob Buford was mentored by a guy named Phil Drucker, or Peter Drucker, big business nerd, I can't even get his name right. Peter Drucker, who is considered the father of modern management. And once every 6 months, Bob Buford would fly out to see Peter Drucker. He'd prepare a long letter about what he was up to in life at this time, what questions he had, and he'd show up ready to talk to Peter Drucker for a couple days they'd spend together, and then he'd leave, and he'd come back 6 months later. And Bob spent the rest of his life saying, I want to do for others what Peter Drucker did for me. And Peter Drucker claimed to be a follower of Jesus, professed to be a follower of Jesus. And so I think this is cool. Peter Drucker mentored Bob Buford. Bob Buford mentored Todd Wilson. And Todd Wilson mentored me. Like, I am in the discipleship tree of Peter Drucker, the father of modern management, because people just kept saying, I need to give to others what someone gave to me. In fact, some of you are in that tree because I've tried to invest in you and be like, let me give you what I can. Ask what you want to ask. So who are your 12? To go from just trying to kill something and drag it back to the cave and, like, I want to do this, I want to build. Okay, but when do you move to, what does it look like to have a life of significance? Like that I'm going to leave a stamp. I'm going to have an impact in people's lives, and that they're going to say, man, I appreciate her because she invested in me. And my wins are partly her wins because of the way she invested in me. So who are your 10? Who are your 12? Who are your 8 to 10? Because the number's symbolic. It doesn't have to be 12. It can be 10. It can be 6. It can be 4. Who am I investing in? Most of us want to live lives that matter. We want to leave a stamp. I want to be an encouragement to the discouraged. I want to be a father to the fatherless or a mother to the motherless. I want to be a game changer for someone who feels like they're losing the game of life. And to do that, you really have to sacrifice and be like, I'm going to pour into some other people. So who are your 12? My alma mater, Kentucky Christian University, used to have this Christian teen convention for high schoolers. Sometimes it was a week for middle schoolers. It was called Summer in the Sun, S-O-N. And it was this Christian teen convention, Jesus it was about. And it was every summer, and it was like this, back to back to back, 3 weeks usually of different kids coming in for a week of convention. That was like this high-tech, high-energy, high-octane church camp on a college campus. And I had a friend starting in 2004. He was kind of in charge of all the programming in a gymnasium that they turned into the convention center at the school. And so his name was Don Smith, which our names were one stroke from being different, Dan Smith and his friend Don Smith. And so he was in charge of all the technical stuff. But one day he had this epic idea that I've always loved. One day he worked at a church in Florida, and he was like, you know what? I've got a lot of work to do every time I help with this convention. What if I hand-selected 8 high school students, 16 or above, rarely a couple 15-year-olds made it because they were super mature, helpful, could work in a team. 16 and over, what if I chose 8 students to take with me to Summer in the Sun? And they ran the camera to show the band on the big, screens and the preacher. And they ran the worship lyrics and helped with the lights and just all of the spotlights and all that stuff for this convention. So he would rent a big U-Haul to pull from Florida to Kentucky, and he would tell these hand-selected 8 students, bring whatever you want. Sometimes they'd bring couches because the married student housing on campus is where they stayed. They have 2 apartments they'd use for 4 weeks while they were there. And they bring couches because can we bring couches? I don't care what you bring. We're just going to fill up the U-Haul and bring whatever you want to bring. You're unloading it. And so they get up to Kentucky, and they'd have a week of setting up for the convention, then 3 back-to-back weeks where they're just in the room anytime there's a main session, handling tech, preparing for tech, doing all that stuff. But they also had all kinds of fun together. They would go cliff diving at Grayson Lake nearby, where there's 10 feet cliffs, and there's 20 feet cliffs, and then there's cliffs that you're not allowed to take other kids on. It can only be your own kids, And so they go cliff diving. They'd go eat at this place called Smokies, which is a popular truck stop that had these epic Smoky Valley burgers. It was on Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives once. And so they do all this fun stuff. The convention ended at noon on Friday. Once they just ended at noon, and they're exhausted from the week, but they got to do it again starting Sunday. So they went back to their apartments. They put, paper and stuff over the windows, made it pitch black like vampires in there. They went to bed immediately, woke up at 6 a.m. on Saturday, and drove an hour and a half to go to Kings Island together on Saturday. So they spent fun time together and just had a blast. But every evening, even if they had been at Smokies till 1:30 a.m., Don told me, they would come back to one of the apartments, and they would do what they call Devos, which is Mo Group. They would get there, and they would sit and talk, and they'd be like, okay, the stuff you've been hearing in the sessions, I know you're running worship lyrics, so it's hard to pay as much attention, but you're hearing speakers from around the country speak. What is Jesus saying to you through these conventions? And then they bust open a Bible and talk about the main theme verses for the week. and they'd sit there and talk. Day one, they'd have a 30-minute Mo group, if you will, and they'd talk for 30 minutes, and nobody'd hardly say anything. Day 8, at the beginning of week 2, it would get to the point where it'd be like, guys, we have to go to bed. It's 2:45. We got to be up at 9, which is early for high schoolers. We got to be up at 9, and we got to do this tech stuff, because people just start talking about, this is the questions I have. These are the questions. This is what I'm struggling with. This is what I want to understand about Jesus. This is what's keeping me from becoming a follower of Jesus. And Don just used it to disciple kids. And he's like, man, I look back at all the stuff I got to be a part of, and those are probably the most formative things I've ever done in my life. And now a lot of those kids are just adults who are major volunteer leaders in churches around the country. Some of them are on staffs at some church, but volunteer leaders who are just invested in God's kingdom. And Don's like, I think it's because I gave them a job. I let them know that church is something that they're vital to. Like, it's something that they kind of internalized because they understood they had a part to play in it. And then we'd talk about it and debrief, and they owned their faith when they left high school. They didn't leave their faith. And a high percentage of those kids became adults who loved and followed Jesus. And I'm always like, Don, that is such an epic story, a great picture of discipleship. By the way, when we moved here in 2005 to start Momentum, from the beginning, before we ever had a tech team, I said, I want a tech team like Don Smith's tech team that is highly filled with students. And when you look at our tech team week after week, often it is a lot of students in that room packed back there saying, will you please insulate this room because it's so hot or too cold in the winter, please. But that's why we have so many tech kids. It's because of Don Smith and the legacy he has created discipling students. Because he was like, I got work to do. I could probably use this work. I could use the help, but I could also use it to pour into people and to say, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to do hands-on discipleship. And man, he's changed some kids' lives. And so who are your 12? Who are your 8 in his case? Who are your 8 to 10 in Bob Buford's case? Okay, so what do I do with them? Let me run down some quick things, some quick points. One is like we've been talking about, how do you spiritually apprentice someone? First is you got to identify him. Okay, so Jesus carefully and prayed about this, then identified 12 people to apprentice. So you got to first play the road trip game. Okay, who are your 12? Who are your 12? Like, just who are these people? And the problem is you don't get to just pick your favorite people. That it's different than the road game in that. Like, because I just want to pick all my favorite people. But here's the deal: favorite people are often being picked by others. So you have to kind of decipher, God, who have you placed in my life for a purpose? And I'll be honest, sometimes you might not even like being around one of the people. But God's like, I'm going to teach you patience, and I'm going to teach you to love the unlovable. Like, it's as much about you as it is about them. So God, who have you placed around me because you want them to be here in my life? So who are your 12? And the kingdom of God isn't about favoritism. So, does anyone come to mind right away, even if I ask that question, of like, man, I'm supposed to be pouring into this person, I think, and I haven't. I hope your spouse is on the list if you're married. I hope your kids are on the list if you're a parent. But is there anyone from your Mo group? Is there anyone from your work? Is there anyone from your softball team? Like, man, God is putting this person in my mind, picturing this person in my brain. Second is include. Mark said in verse 3, chapter 3, verse 14, Jesus appointed the 12 that they might be with him. Okay, so it just means you have to include them in your life. The real Jesus was a disciple maker who included people when he could have rolled solo. He could have really enjoyed a lot more quiet time than he chose to, and could have read more scrolls. Some good fiction scrolls were out that summer, and he could have just read, but no, he's like investing in people. So you have to start investing by including people. Here's the deal with this, whole bunch of grace here. You discipling others cannot look like it looked like for Jesus. People left their spouses to go travel long distances for long amounts of time with Jesus, and they just lived with him. They camped out together. They traveled on foot together, and I'm convinced that even today, among every person here, it can't look the same. Yeah, every one of our lives looks so different from the next person. It has to be custom made. You have to figure out, how can this work for me to include people in my life. And I know one guy who every once in a while takes hiking trips with other guys, and they read a book before they go, and then in the evenings, they smoke cigars, and they talk about the book, and he asks some questions like, how are you doing? How is your marriage? How are you doing with Jesus? And they just start talking about that, smoking some cigars on a deck at a hotel or, out somewhere on their hiking trip. Don didn't do that with his high school students. They didn't do cigars, but he did. And so it might be coffee dates. That might be like, I love coffee. That'll be easy for me. It might be camping trips. It might be play dates. I know a wife who invited a young lady she was discipling to her house and just said, I am so overwhelmed with stuff, but I need to do this. It's who I want to be. I want to live a significant life and make disciples how Jesus asked me to. So she would invite her over and said, I don't mean this to be offensive, but when you come over, I'll be doing laundry. And she said, I'll be doing laundry and folding clothes. And so the young lady was like, well, I'll fold clothes with you, and I'll ask you questions, pick your brain. We'll talk about life and faith. And I'm like, sucker. I'm going to disciple so many people when it's time to mow the lawn. Like, sucker. And so that was just her way. This is the only way it can work for me, but I want to pour into you, so come over while I'm doing laundry and folding clothes. Thanks for the help, sucker. And so it's sometimes it's you've got a lot of work to do, and it might be work to serve others. How, like Don Smith, can I invite them into that work and just say, we'll use this as an opportunity to connect, and I can ask you how you're doing, and I can care for you spiritually, and I can say, what is Jesus saying to you through this work or in your life? But it has to be custom made to include your spiritual apprentices. The third is instruct. Mark shows us that Jesus spent an awful lot of time occupied by training and instructing his disciples. It's kind of overwhelming to me. And so you have to just look for teachable moments to be like, let me give some spiritual guidance in this transition you're going through that I've been through. I mean, if you're their mentor, it's not like they're going to be offended by that. Like, oh, you just think you're so smart. Let me tell you what I learned through that season of having my first child, moving to a new area, losing my job, whatever, struggling with infertility, whatever it is. And be like, let me speak into what we learned or what I learned, and just say my door is always open for questions. My wife Shannon has discipled a lot of ladies over the years, and I know when we had 3 littles, she's overwhelmed with life. And she said, I would love to invest in you, and you. But here's the way it has to be, because I just don't have the time that I want to have to meet with each of you one-on-one. Impossible. I also want you to notice, by the way, Jesus didn't do that. He didn't meet one-on-one with each of the 12. They were 12ing together. It was always him and the 12 or him and 3. So he didn't do it like I got to make time for coffee with each individual if there's a lot of people. So she would say, we're going to do it through email, and I'm going to ask you through email, how's your personal time with God going? Prayer, scripture reading, how your kids doing if you have any, how's your husband doing if you have one, your marriage, how you doing personally? What are your prayer requests? How can I pray for you? And then she would also say, just ask me any questions you want to ask me. And so she'd spend some time researching, helping find answers, and replying an email when she could fit it in, when kids weren't waking up from naps or, throwing food on the walls. She'd be like, okay, I got some time that I can respond and invest in these friends who I care deeply about. And I think one of the things you have to know, too, if you're the disciple, is one of the best things you can do is to make it easy for someone to disciple you, you have to come with the questions. Like, you have to come loaded with, what am I struggling through or with, or like interested in knowing, and going to them and saying, I'm showing up with questions, like Bob Buford with a written note for Peter Drucker. I used to do this with a mentor who lived in Massillon. Still a mentor, but it's not in a rhythm that we meet. It used to be like once a month, can I come buy you coffee or lunch? And I will come with questions because I value your time. And I'm just thankful you're giving me time to mentor me, to disciple me. And so come with the questions so that they can instruct you, because they want to help you win spiritually. Fourth, this will be a short one, is intercede. Intercede just means pray on behalf of them. I'm going to intercede in prayer for you. Jesus said one time, Simon, Simon, that's Simon Peter, Satan is asked to sift all of you as wheat, But I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. Wouldn't that be overwhelming to know Jesus was going to bat for you praying because he knew Satan wanted to destroy you? And so the idea is pray for your disciples, bump them toward the top of your list, and pray for them the way Jesus prayed for his disciples, because Satan is trying to sift students around you like wheat. He's trying to destroy friends around you like wheat. He's just trying to rip them up the way that the seed of a wheat is separated from the chaff, and he's just trying to sift you and tear you up, and your friends too. So it's a big deal to be praying for them and to know this is a spiritual battle for them. And then the last one is induce, and that means to lead or to move by persuasion, to prompt, to urge, especially in this case toward multiplication. The idea is to tell them from day one day you need to say, I want to do for others what someone did for me. And Jesus, this is what he was doing. In Mark 3:14, it says, he appointed 12 that they might be with him and that he might send them out. So his purpose was twofold. One was relational, that they might be with him and learn, hands-on learning and apprenticeship. Two was missional. Like, there is a mission here. There are more people to be discipled, so I send you out to become the one who is the disciple maker. Here's the deal. A lot of you know this. A lot of you experience this. You don't always get the biological father or biological mother that you should have got, right? Like, you don't always get the right biological father, right biological mother. But here's what you can do. You can adopt spiritual fathers. You can adopt spiritual mothers. Or, in the other direction, you can adopt spiritual sons and spiritual daughters. Or, if that feels too condescending to you, you can adopt spiritual little brothers, spiritual little sisters, and say, I want to do for you what someone has done for me, or what Jesus did for his disciples. Who are your 12? Who are your 8 to 10? Who are your 4? Who are they? Let's pray.